Hello, I'm Varun, and I welcome you all to this another episode of Vimarsh Cafe, initiated by Foundation for Creative Social Research. And today we have Gurkirat as our guest. Gurkirat has recently completed her PhD from the Center for the Study of Social Systems, JNU, and she has also recently joined as a faculty in the Department of Rural Management, School of Liberal Arts, Shivnadar University. Welcome, Gurkirat.
Thank you, Varun. Thank you so much for having me.
So I was going through your PhD thesis work, and your title is Agrarian Transformation of Rural Rajasthan, a Sociological Study of Food System.
That's right.
So can you please elaborate a bit what is the study all about and what is the larger
Sure.
discourse that you have explored?
Definitely. So I'll come to the field later, but just as for the title, the attempt in this PhD has been to marry the fields of sociology of agriculture with sociology of medicine or health, if you may say so. And through food systems as a conceptual category, or like as a category which I would like to analyze, what I've tried to do is I've sort of tried to bridge the gap between the two. So what I'm trying to do is I'm mapping the transformation of a rural landscape, of how agricultural productivity guided it, roughly over a period of around 100 years. So that's a temporal phase that I'm looking at. And I'm trying to see epistemologically what are the changes that came into not only the kind of crops that people started growing, but their knowledge systems around it as well.
So coming to this part of methodology and methods, it seems to me that you have explored historical ethnographic methodology.
That's right.
Or rather method in that sense, and your methodology is mostly qualitative.
That's right.
And but the interesting component that I came across was something called science and technology studies, and you've mentioned about epistemology and all. Can you briefly explain what science and technology studies is?
Sure, definitely. So science and technology studies, again, looks at this integration of how technology and science impact the society and various knowledge systems in it. There's no one particular theoretical perspective that I've taken into account, but then I'm looking at various works of Latour, the actor network theory, where you provide agency to human as well as non-human actors, and then you see how they operate within a network and what is the impact of one over the other. So that is one. And science and technology studies in this context primarily works in the way where I'm trying to look at assemblages also a little bit, because we're looking at a complex food system, and I'm not really looking at the perspectives of production, rather consumption, because that is what my narrative analysis is based on. I see how the alternative theories of consumption are different from the paradigm of production that we have instituted.
So before going deeply into this context of food and food security and consumption, can you briefly again explain what is your methodology in terms of your field and your method and data collection knowledge?
Sure. So again, as I said, it's a historical ethnography. So I undertook it in two parts. One is the archival research, because I'm looking at a period of 100 years, of course, and then so a lot of research, it's based in the archives. I've been to the Rajasthan State Archives of Bikaner and Jodhpur, and of course to National Archives in Delhi. And that's one part of the research. The second bit is the ethnography, where I mainly focus on narrative analysis. And I've collected those through focus group interviews over a stretched period of time of around 3 to 4 years. Personal narratives, oral histories, life histories. So these are the components.
And your area, field area is Canal region of Rajasthan, northwestern Rajasthan.
That's right.
So would you like to explain how this region is? Why did you choose this region? What is your association with this region? And why this region is so important in terms of transformation that has happened from agriculture, from pastoralist to agriculture and all that?
I'd love to, yeah. So this region is the northern tip of Rajasthan, as you may call it. Historically, the Bikaner kingdom comprised of all of this region, the Gang Canal region as they call it. And it is peculiar and interesting at the same time, because it's known as the wheat basket or the granary of Rajasthan. Rajasthan, most of the agriculture is rain-fed, usually in this part of the region, because it is the desert region. So coming with the canals and turning of a desert into a greenery or whatever, greening the desert, that is what was interesting to me. And historically, this region comprised of Ramnagar was the name of the place actually. So it later came out to be Sri Ganganagar after the canal was built here. And it also, earlier this land was not really claimed by anybody. It was only during somewhere around the early 1900s that the Bikaner kingdom took over this part of the Bahawalpur state, yes, the kingdom. And then later on when the canal came in, because obviously the canal had to come through Punjab, the Satluj waters, so this place became really significant, whereas earlier it was just known as a wasteland or a barren wasteland where most pastoral activities used to happen.
So this, you mentioned wasteland. I think this seems to be a very important concept, theoretical concept in your work. So would you like to again briefly explain what this concept of wasteland is, what is its genealogy, and how did this colonial framework sort of produce this idea? Is it colonial in nature?
Definitely.
Or it's been there before colonialism, advent of colonialism, and how did the post-colonial state explore this idea of wasteland, and what exactly is wasteland?
Thank you for asking that, Varun. Wasteland actually forms a very core and important concept of my work because that is where the story begins. The story begins by understanding of a land and its people as wastes. So this region, historically, it's the Bagar, as they know it, and Bagaris are the people who inhabit, and that's a particular dialect, a language now. So what happened in Ayurvedic texts, if you look up about this region, it's known as the Jangala Desh. So Jangal Desh and Bagar are simultaneous co-terminus with each other, whereas when the Englishmen, especially Todd, when they started traversing around this area, they started using terms as lack of verdure or something similar to what could be a better word for this? Something saying there's a lack of resources and people are desolate, it's barren. So these words were the initial words that came in. And this is how their narratives, their description about this land begin. So James Todd was one of the first persons to do this. But what was interesting at the same time is that they were very impressed by how people were managing resources here. So at one point, they were comparing it something similar to the Arab world, where they said this region is comparable to the Nomadian brethren of the Arab. But at the same time, he said that it's interesting how these people are very happy without the verdure. So they would prefer the desert over the barrenness of the desert over the hills or anything else, right? So that's how the narrative started, and it sort of began like as a confusion in the colonial mindset. And then they had a lot of discussion over this. The colonialists per se particularly were not really interested in the development of canals in this region. But Maharaja Ganga Singh, who is revered, one of the most revered rulers of the Bikaner kingdom, so this was his life goal primarily, and he's also known as the Bhagirath. Bhagirath is someone who brought down the river. So same as Maharaja Ganga Singh, and it's on his name that Sri Ganganagar takes its name after. So this was his dream project. There was a particular period of drought in this region known as the Chapaniya Akal, which is the Vikram Samvant year of 1886. And around that period, a lot of deaths happened. There was lack of food, lack of water, and then Maharaja Ganga Singh sort of pled to the colonial masters of bringing down canal waters from Punjab to this region and make it green. So this all started with, of course, a great intention. The colonialists, of course, perceived it as a wasteland, and so did Maharaja Ganga Singh in many ways, again. So he aligned with that idea of modernity, of the colonial modernity and scientific imperialism. And he wanted to bring down the canal waters for the people of this region. And so it came to be.
So ultimately, in one way, we can make this argument that it was a certain colonial episteme.
That's right.
That actually changed the frame of looking at land and productivity and what is productive, what is not.
That's right.
So in that context, your whole thesis revolves around this question of how this transformation happened from being an area which had its own ecology and which had its own ontologies, rather local knowledge systems and epistemologies. And with the advent of a certain kind of dynamic that was brought in by colonial framework of thinking, and that was also carried forward by the post-colonial state, things got radically changed. So explain more thoroughly, like how did this transformation happen, and how did this productivity paradigm became so deeply entrenched that it is now commonsensical?
Definitely. So, as I don't think I've mentioned this before. So once a land gets classified as waste, the basis of classifying it as waste is primarily based on productivity. So they say, so in the colonial narratives that I've analyzed, they say that although rainfall is limited and the water resources are limited, but whatever gets produced here is of excellent quality. Right? But it is limited and less, and so are the people. So one very interesting thing to observe here, and I derive from Tanuja Kothyal's work. She's from JNU. She's written this particular book called Nomadic Narratives, and she describes this region of Marwar, or the northwestern region of Rajasthan, as a circulatory mobile system. Right? And that is where I derive it from. I understand this region as a mobile circulatory system, which is not the best thing, as James Scott would say. It's not the best thing for the formation of a state. Right? So you need people to settle down, and you need production that can be quantified. So earlier, the revenue systems that existed here, the taxes were mostly based on pastoral activities. So, and they also had taxes like the Dhua Bach, or on the Mal. Mal is the livestock that the pastoralists held. So these were the kind of taxes, not like taxes were not being collected earlier, but there was a lack of organization, which is what the colonialists kept on stressing upon. They said कि बहुत सारे रीजन्स ऐसे हैं जहाँ पे टैक्स नहीं लिया जाता है, माफ कर दिया जाता है, और the Jagirdars also let go of it, and which is the problem in Bikaner. So they identified it as a problem again, and which is why it is unproductive and therefore it is waste. And then various administrators who also came into this region, the colonial administrators, they also said that the primary problem is with the people. They don't stop moving. But very interestingly, Kavuri, and he said that the people move because there is a lack of water and there's a lack of production. But Kavuri then has, of course, discussed elaborately upon this, and she's described that this is not the case. Mobility was a way of life for these regions, and they were way more global before globalization came in, right? And they interacted with far-flung places because this is a frontier region. So mobility was a system of life, and this is how they arranged their food resources or economic activities around it. And therefore, that's the point where we begin from. So it was a problem for the colonialists, but not for the people.
So in a way, the plank of scarcity and all, it was basically a ploy deployed by the colonial state to force these nomadic groups into settlement, so that agricultural productivity paradigm can become the dominant framework, so that colonial state can unfold its logic. Am I correct?
Yes, Varun, I'd agree with that. But then again, I would prevent myself from looking at it as a ploy. Because I think because I feel we're really laden with these terms, and when I use something like actor network theory, what it makes me understand is the fact that there are various actors who are involved in this, and then they're thinking in particular ways and they're shaping discourses, and that's how paradigms also shift. Not necessarily a ploy, maybe, but yes, a way of looking at things. Yes,
Very importantly, you mentioned actor network and all. And assemblages. So for our audience, can you explain briefly what assemblages are? Because it's a very important concept in science and technology studies, I know, but it is also not very well known even in sociology.
Yeah, to be honest, really, Varun, I do not really still have a great grasp over assemblages, and I would really try to not overuse it. And I've looked at Wim Mandale's work on assemblages. And the primary, agar seedhi bhasha mein bataya jaye, what he's trying to do is that he's saying every component and process within a system is important to look at. Because एक भी चीज बदलेगी तो दूसरे पे प्रभाव पड़ेगा. So you take out one thing and you plug in the other, it's going to change the entire dynamic. This is what Actor Network also talks about at the same time. But then assemblages sort of takes it a step further and makes it so the human and the non-human agency, of course, exists in the actor network theory. But यहाँ पे there are various other parameters that you're also trying to look at. So assemblages is something that I've not really thoroughly employed or studied well in this.
So can be clubbed as part of the so-called post-human discourse, wherein there is equal involvement of human as well as non-human,
yes.
and the binary, that is again a certain that comes from a certain historical
very importantly
shift,
yes,
in our frame of thinking, and the binary between human and non-human
yes,
is being challenged in that discourse.
That's right. And binaries of various kinds. Between the expert and the non-expert, between what is vernacular and what is not non-vernacular, natives and non-natives, all of these binaries.
Again, going back to your thesis, while reading your introduction and your conclusion, I came across this very important component called the importance of nutrient and importance of looking at food different from the, again, productivity and yield centric component.
That's right.
Or aspect of looking at food. So in that context, looking at the current crisis that we have,
right,
food security crisis, and also that was there in the time of Green Revolution. So how do you see this whole discourse of food security, which, I mean, as you rightly pointed out, tends to sometimes obscure the gap that exists between nutrient and calorie centric approach to food. So would you like to explain more thoroughly that what is this gap that you have mentioned in your work?
Sure, most definitely. So various scholars great Indian scholars are working on debunking the myth of this scarcity, that of yield gap that the Green Revolution tried to bridge. So I don't think we need to get into that. So various scholars like Dr. Richa Kumar or Aniketa Aga or Professor Mahisha or Rajeshwari Raina, so many people are already debunking this myth, A.R. Vasavi. So then the question shifts towards, so we have a skinny fat problem emerging in the country.
Typical to Indian genotype.
Typical to
South
Indian,
Asian,
yes. So definitely there's a problem in the way now we're consuming food, because we over-focused, I guess, on the yield.
And calories.
And calorie, And calories are something, it's an imported concept. It's a bio-scientific concept. Doesn't really belong to the knowledge systems of people. Here I would again prevent myself from drawing a boundary as such. But then again, we're not very aware of the way, simply like the way we prepare our food. Of course, for our generation, hum keh sakte ho, these are my macros and these are my micros. But if you ask your grandmother, she'd be like, mujhe nahi pata what is a carbohydrate or what's a protein or whatever, but she'd cook splendid meals and it'll give you great energy, and it'll give and again, energy again is a concept which is foreign. So we use all of these terminologies, which is again problematic, I guess, because when I went into the field, that was the initial problem I faced as well. So I went on asking people, what do they consider as healthy food? And most of the elderly people, which was one of my primary research groups, they did not actually come up with terms such as calories or macros or micros or carbohydrates or proteins. One simple thing which was a common thread in all of their narratives was ki ab anaj meetha nahi hai. So the food is not sweet any longer. It doesn't taste sweet. And initially, to my mind, which is conditioned in this calorie bioscientific discourse, it found that problematic. I felt there's nothing really I'm deriving out of this research, because anywhere I go, they give me these generic statements, which only later, to my surprise and to my great surprise, I discovered that has a body of knowledge that addresses it. So if you look at Ayurvedic texts, because those are the only ones that I've been able to look at here. So what I'm also trying to do is I'm trying to bridge this gap between codified and non-codified bodies of knowledge, or textual or oral sources, जो कि हम सोचते हैं कि दोनों अलग हैं एक दूसरे से. So जो भी बात आपकी दादी कर रही हैं, हम सोचते हैं it's all mumbo jumbo. Because इनको तो कुछ पता नहीं है, she's not scientific. So that's a common parlance. But that is primarily what I'm trying to debunk through my research. And I'm trying to argue कि जो मीठा का aspect है, which I'd like to elaborate upon. It's derived from a textual source of knowledge. And it addresses the problems that we're facing in our nutritional insecurity today.
Are you even trying to not call it scientific deliberately, because the moment you call it scientific knowledge, again you fall into a certain episteme, which is debatable.
That's quite an interesting question, Varun. Well, I would want to call it scientific to break the hegemony to begin with, right? I do not know whether placing scientific over non-scientific again is a great approach, but for now, at least, because these have been debunked, these have been marginalized on the basis of being non-scientific, I would want to place them up to not just want to. I mean, that's the entire endeavor where I'm trying to see that and argue that these are knowledge systems that are derived from textual sources itself, indigenous textual sources.
And it is experiential in that sense, like it has been experienced and people have been living this through this knowledge system since ages. And
absolutely, yes. And I think we still employ it. And I think we're somewhere standing at the crossroads of something which is scientific or quote unquote cultural, right? So it's an amalgamation of the two, and we're really not clear about the logic of either of the two.
And using Latour in that sense.
Using Latour in that sense, absolutely, yes.
Nature culture
divide, yes.
Yeah. And now focusing more on this question of productivity and agrarian transformation, as well as in third chapter you've explored this staple, the idea of staple, कि जिसमें हम wheat and barley की भी बात कर रहे हैं, बाजरा sorry, and millets. So how do you see like if you contextualize your chapter in the current discourse regarding this whole superfood idea of bajra being millets being superfood, especially bajra and all. So where do you locate your third chapter in the current discourse, if I can ask this way?
Thank you so much for asking. This is something I'd love to elaborate upon. So when I went into the field, this is the mindset I went with, that millets are better than cereal crops, because that is the discourse.
We all have this mindset.
Yes, we all have this now.
Isn't it?
And it's not incorrect completely, of course. But because this was a historical ethnography, and I think that method itself led to these observations, and which is why I think we should really never miss the history aspect of how things work out. What I discovered was this is a frontier region where pastoral activities predominated. It has been always a fine balance of agro-pastoralism, the food system here, which has now been converted into purely an agrarian food system. So ये जो combination है agro-pastoralism का, वो सिर्फ आपके production में नहीं reflect होता है, वो आपके consumption में भी होता है. तो what I tried to discover and noticed, actually stumbled upon accidentally and for the greatest reason ever, which is कि ये जो transformation था, this was twofold. So once, पहले आपने क्या किया, एक agro-pastoral society को, पहले जब canal आया, this is, I'm talking about between the years 1927 till the independence, 1947. तो सबसे पहले इन्होंने जो करना शुरू किया, productivity, उन्होंने बाजरे को बढ़ाना शुरू किया. So बाजरा is a millet, which is pearl millet. So बाजरे की productivity बढ़ी because it could be enumerated, it's a grain. And pastoralists को sideline किया गया. तो आपने जो pastoralist का aspect था वो पीछे निकाला. और बाजरे के बाद जब आपने कैनाल की इंटेंसिफिकेशन की और ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन आया और एग्रीकल्चरल इंटेंसिफिकेशन बढ़ी, तो आप मिलेट क्रॉप से सीरियल क्रॉप्स की तरफ कंसंट्रेट करने लग गए. अब जब हम इन लोगों से, इनके जो हिस्टोरिकली इनकी जनरेशंस यहाँ है, आई एम ओनली यूजिंग दिस कॉन्सेप्ट फॉर ह्यूरिस्टिक पर्पसेस कि कौन नेटिव्स है, कौन सेटलर्स है, बट हु कैन ट्रेस देयर लिनिएज back generations back to this region, उनकी जो eating practices हैं, उनमें सिर्फ millets important नहीं है, which is really interesting. तो उनके लिए मैं आपको एक narrative बताती हूँ, I think इससे better explain होगा. तो I was talking to someone and they said कि जब मैं बाजरा, मेरी माँ, जब मैं बाजरा खाता हूँ, अगर उसमें घी या छाछ, लस्सी नहीं डालते, तो वो कहते हैं कि इससे तुम दुष्ट हो जाओगे. You'll become an evil person, right? This is again very interesting, and then it took me back to the works of Osella and Osella, which is a very interesting work. They work on this concept of sneham. Sneham, where sneham is understood as an affectionate quality, but sneham in Ayurveda is understood as fat or something that is oily, right? So sneham. So in order for your social relationships in your body to function well, you need sneham. You need affection and you need that fat content in your body. So एट द फेस ऑफ इट जब आप ऐसी कोई स्टेटमेंट सुनेंगे आप बोलेंगे क्या मतलब पिछड़ी सोच है, दुष्ट हो जाओगे, व्हाट डज दैट मीन, राइट? बट बाय दुष्ट ही बेसिकली टेंड्स टू इम्प्लाई कि अगर आप बाजरे को सप्लीमेंट नहीं करेंगे विद घी या विद बटर मिल्क तो क्या होगा, दैट इट इज वन नॉट न्यूट्रिशनली गोइंग टू absorb. Again, I would want to not use that word because that is not what their knowledge system describes. कि वो मतलब बेहतर नहीं रहेगा आपकी सेहत के लिए, it wouldn't be good. तो then I started looking for its textual sources कि ऐसी बात कहीं किसी textual source में है. So which again came to my surprise very interestingly कि तो आयुर्वेद में जैसे 3 कॉन्सेप्ट है, बेसिकली 3 दोषास की बात की जाती है कि वात, पित्त और कफ, जिससे आपकी पूरी बॉडी की कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन डिफाइन होती है. सो हर जो भी फूड मटेरियल है वो एक पर्टिकुलर दोष से प्रीडोमिनेटेड होता है यूजुअली, और हर रीजन भी. एंड Zimmerman has worked elaborately on this, where he's classified the entire Indian subcontinent region into different zones as per Ayurved. तो जो इस तरफ वाला जो हमारा नॉर्थ वेस्टर्न रीजन है, दिस इज ऑल जंगल देश, विच इज वात प्रीडोमिनेंट. सो वात, इफ आई रफली ट्रांसलेट इट, ऑल्दो इट्स अ बैड ट्रांसलेशन, इट बेसिकली मीन्स कि वो आपकी बॉडी में ड्राइनेस बढ़ाएगा. ठीक. वात और पित्त, पित्त इज द हीट. सो दिस रीजन इन इटसेल्फ इज डोमिनेटेड बाय वात एंड पित्त. Bajra again is predominant in Vat. So how do you counterbalance that Vat?
Through lassi and...
Yes, because you're adding it and then it sort of balances out that Vat and Pitt's dosh, roughly speaking.
इसमें again, I'm not an expert in this area, but जो मेरे सवाल हमेशा रहे हैं आयुर्वेदिक नॉलेज सिस्टम को लेकर, वो ये रहा है कि हम इंटेलिजिबिलिटी या कमेंसरेबिलिटी कैसे कायम करें. How do we make one knowledge system with a certain vocabulary, technical vocabulary, and a certain idea of body, which is generally, I don't know how viable this term holistic is, but it's generally been called as holistic in local, colloquial parlance and all. So, intelligibility या communication दो knowledge system के दरमियान कैसे हम लोग स्थापित कर सकते हैं? That is the most fundamental question I feel. Because अगर हम modern, allopathic Western modern knowledge medicine के हिसाब से देखें, so they have a certain idea of anatomy, physiology, which they claim to be based on evidence, empirical evidence, and Ayurveda also claims to be experiential. तो सबसे बड़ा सवाल ये आता है, and sometimes जैसे again I'll come to A2 milk का debate, लेकिन fundamental सवाल यही है कि जो understanding है knowledge की, and especially knowledge of the body and knowledge of the mind, जो आयुर्वेदा में है और जो वेस्टर्न में है, उसके दरमियान कम्युनिकेशन कैसे करें जिसमें हम क्लिनिकल ट्रायल्स कर सकें irrespective of the biases that are there in both the knowledge system, because every knowledge system is afflicted with a certain bias. We cannot ignore that. So do you think that वो communication or intelligibility is the key to make knowledge systems communicate with each other in a more comprehensive way, so that a certain kind of knowledge which is dialectically produced, rather, if I can use the word, जो कि for the betterment of larger humanity, because we cannot also be parochial in our understanding कि obviously we are humans, obviously we are divided by geographies and all, but there is a universal component to our being, if I can say that. So एक point पे वो parochialism भी ना आए और एक वो hegemony भी ना हो universal की. बिल्कुल. So do you think that could be a way out in a way?
Yes, and I think I've explored something similar to this, and for this I've referred to Professor Harish Narayan Das's work, where जब आप आयुर्वेद की बात करते हैं वरुण, तो यूजुअली क्या है, आजकल जैसे डिबेट है हमारी कि अगर हम एग्रो इकोलॉजी की तरफ बढ़ रहे हैं तो आपको प्लूरैलिटी को कंसिडर करना पड़ेगा और डाइवर्स ग्रुप्स को देखना पड़ेगा, एंड विच इज कार्डिनल आई गेस, बिकॉज कोई भी, एज यू सेड, एक नॉलेज सिस्टम हर चीज को प्रॉपरली एड्रेस नहीं कर सकता है. The good thing about Ayurveda is that it acknowledges the fact. It says ki this is not the end of it. So Ayurveda will give you various variables, and it is not just Ayurveda. So what I tried to do was I tried to look for evidence in Chinese indigenous sources, and they say again something similar to what Ayurveda is speaking. So I feel at a broader level, if you look at Unani, or if you look at Chinese medicine, or if you look at Greek medicine, I feel you can always draw similarities, and even with
Is
biomedicine
it
as
something
well.
to do with pre-modern ways of looking at body and modern ways of looking at body?
If you define modern ways of looking at body through a bioscientific lens, then yeah, maybe that binary. But I still guess कि सब में कहीं ना कहीं एक जाके एक जुड़ता है, कहीं ना कहीं वो जुड़ता है. आयुर्वेद में क्या है कि वो ये चीज एक्नॉलेज करते हैं, and then they give you various variables. So simply अगर मैं आपको बोलूं कि अगर आपने बाजरे में उसको डाल दिया और वो हर एक के लिए वर्क करेगा, that is not true. आपकी बॉडीली कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, आपकी बॉडी में कौन सा दोष प्रीडोमिनेंट है, आप उसको किस तरह से पका रहे हैं, सो दोज आर कॉल्ड संस्कारास, राइट, जो कि हमारी सोसाइटी में भी होते हैं, द रिचुअल्स बेसिकली, राइट. आप उसको किस चीज में पका रहे हैं, दीज आर डिबेट्स दैट वी आर लिसनिंग टू इन दिस एंटायर ऑर्गेनिक फूड मूवमेंट एज वेल, कि आप ब्रास यूटेंसिल्स यूज कीजिए, आप ये कीजिए. तो ये सब बातें आयुर्वेद करता है. द अनदर थिंग इज, जैसे आप कह रहे हैं कि ये जो लैंग्वेज है ये कैसे मतलब हो, तो व्हाट आई नोटिस्ड इज कि इन नैरेटिव्स में लोग जनरली ऐसी बात करते हैं, वो बोलते हैं कि इसकी बाय बढ़ गई है और गर्मी आ गई है शरीर में. सो these are the terms that they're not creating out of thin air. These are terms that have textual references. And very interestingly, what I observed was कि कई households हैं जो एक पर्टिकुलर आयुर्वेदिक टेक्स्ट है धन्वंतरी, उसको कंसल्ट करते हैं आज भी टू अंडरस्टैंड द प्रॉपर्टीज ऑफ सर्टेन फूड्स. So it's not like they are creating these narratives out of their head. There is a source, a textual source that they're referring to. And again, coming to Professor Harish Narayan Das's work, he always says कि वैदिकी और लौकिकी दो चीजें हैं. So वैदिकी is something that Ayurveda, for example, your Vedya would tell you कि आप ये कीजिए, और लौकिकी है जो आपके कॉन्टेक्स्ट के स्पेसिफिक है. तो अगर आप अपने बर्थ रिचुअल्स देखेंगे या कोई और रिचुअल्स देखेंगे, तो एक प्रिस्क्राइब्ड फॉर्मेट तो हर रिलीजन का फॉर एग्जांपल है कि आपको ये पर्टिकुलर चीजें करनी है. बट फिर हर घर का जो एक आइडिया है वो डिफरेंट होगा, हर कम्युनिटी का डिफरेंट होगा. And both of those. So I guess that's how I think
आपके काम का जो मुझे लगता है uniqueness, if I can say that, then I would say कि वो जो social ecology है, you have thoroughly explored that. कि generally जो हम non-sociological background से जो होते हैं, they don't understand कि how sociologically rooted medicine is. So
Absolutely.
as you know, in very first statement you have said that your work is like a marriage between anthropology of medicine and anthropology of agriculture,
right,
which is again a very unique thing in that sense as far as my knowledge is concerned. So now coming to this whole again, you know, this idea of how has your work explored this sort of one-dimensional approach towards nutrition, which you have explained, and again, you know, this taking this example of last chapter of yours, which seems to be most intriguing, dealing with this whole controversy about milk, protein, A2 milk and all, and the whole historical and as well as contemporary cultural discourse about it. So taking that nutrient component of your work and bringing your fifth chapter, can you elaborate on that?
Definitely. So the genesis of this chapter basically came from my MPhil work, where I worked on nutraceuticals. And the theoretical concept that I took in was Human Kimura's nutritionism ideology, or Rabinow and Rose, what they call as biomedical reductionism of food. तो होता क्या है, you take one food component, आप अगर vegetables लेते हैं, आप बोलते हैं oh, these are mineral rich. आप wheat लेंगे, बोलेंगे oh, this is carbohydrate rich. But is that the end of the story? Not really. Then you're basically reducing food to its component parts, which is nutritionism, as Kimura would explain. So जब आप किसी भी food को isolationist तरीके से देखेंगे of how it will work on you, then definitely problems will get created and which are evident in the society. So while I'm looking at A2 milk, the primary reason was कि क्योंकि ये region एक pastoral activity dominated region रहा है historically, और हो क्या रहा है because agrarian productivity, you know, is again questionable nowadays. Agricultural futures जो हैं agriculture में, the youth do not really find it conducive. तो अभी new developments हैं जिनकी तरफ हम जा रहे हैं, और ये बड़े interesting developments हैं क्योंकि ये somewhere this is a I would like to use that term called creolization. It's a formation of a creole of culture and science, or modern and non-modern together, But again, what we should be cautious is of the fact that we might be defying the logics of either of the two systems of knowledge if they are two separate domains of knowledge. तो हो क्या रहा है, these people they want to identify देसी गाय जो जिसे हम कहते हैं indigenous breeds of cows as A2 और जिसके लिए so this entire thing started actually, I'll give you a brief background behind it. It started in the year 1994 in New Zealand where the New Zealand Child Health Care Commission, they commissioned a study on understanding the nutritional properties of milk, and they discovered कि जिस milk में A2 है, A2 is a particular protein allele, जिसमें भी वो है, वो milk beneficial है for the health of children, and an entire industry then was formed on the basis of it, and that was the genesis of it. And now that entire concept, जब आप lactose intolerance की बात करते हैं, then again आप ये नोसोलॉजिकल कैटेगरीज हैं of how you categorize disease. आयुर्वेद में अगर आप बात करेंगे, आप नेटिव लोगों से पूछेंगे तो उन्हें नहीं पता लैक्टोस इंटॉलरेंस क्या है. आप उन्हीं की गाय यूज करके लैक्टोस इंटॉलरेंस को क्योर करने की कोशिश करेंगे तो वो शायद नहीं बता पाएंगे. सो अगेन देयर इज सॉर्ट ऑफ लाइक एन expert over a non-expert. But then, so I study this particular community of pastoralists called the Johiyas, the Johiya Rajputs. And most of them have migrated towards Pakistan during the independence period. And they are the marginalized group, of course, in this region. And in few pockets of the Gankanal region, you find them. And they have really interesting insights to offer. So they have bred this particular breed of cow historically. And it's called the Rathi cow. So the Rathi cow is being identified as A2. When it's being identified as A2, what they're doing is कि अब ये A2 identify हो गया है, इसको dairy farming practices की तरह रियाय करना शुरू कर देते हैं. But then again, you're taking it out of their context
or ecology,
or ecology, or the way things should work. So, which is why a part of my chapter titles is the pastoralist's logic. And why logic? Because again, first of all, I would like to clarify the air on this. Ki A2 milk might contain, yes, A2 protein, and there is really not enough scientific consensus that's being built on it as per
data.
Yet. There's not enough data, not enough human trials that have been conducted. So it's in the air, but then the market is really gaining on this. So once you identify, even Indian scientific agencies hain, who would, for example, for 1,000 rupees for government organization, or for some, I think 8,000 rupees for if you're a private livestock owner, and they would do this test for you. वो आपको एक प्रमाणित करेंगे कि आपकी गाय में A2 एलील है, और आप वो सर्टिफिकेट लगाएंगे अपने प्रोडक्ट्स पे जब आप उसको बताएंगे. वो बेहतर है या नहीं, किन किन तरीकों से बेहतर है, we still have a lack of scientific consensus.
A2 गाय जरूरी नहीं है कि इंडियन ही हो, वो तो कोई कहीं की भी हो सकती है.
बिल्कुल हो सकती है. तो मैं आपको वही बताना चाहती हूँ कि उसमें भी अभी गाय का एक वो डिवीजन बन गया है कि जो जर्सी और HF गाय है वो तो बुरी है. अब जो राठी और ये दूसरी गाय है.
जो मेन पॉइंट आप कहना चाह रहे हैं शायद ये है कि जो उसकी इकोलॉजी है, जिस सेटअप में गाय रहती है या जिस सेटअप में उसको रेयर किया जाता है और जो मिल्क प्रोडक्शन होता है, that is more important.
The entire
practice is more important rather than just obsessively focusing on one protein and making grand claims that this protein is much more beneficial and it can cure.
That's right, and most of the times Varun, these practices they get relegated as cultural mysticism. Jैसे the Johiyas, they never used to sell milk. उनके लिए this is equivalent to sin. They don't sell milk.
And you made this distinction between cultural mysticism and economic rationality.
So economic rationality. So there are two groups that are divided. Whosoever studies pastoralists usually, there's a group of scholars who, of course, will claim that these are people who have survived the times of development, and they've survived and they've sort of adapted to the new system, and therefore they have this brilliant economic rationality. And then a few would say कि ये culturally mystic ideas हैं,
so again you're going to transcend the binary.
Yes, that's the attempt. That's the attempt where I'm trying to say कि it's neither of the two. It's neither of the two. It is rooted in both, but it's a way of life. So it's not about it's more about life sustenance is what I'd like to argue.
And you have called it sustenance over subsistence.
Yes. So usually जब आप cultural mysticism की बात करते हैं, pastoral economies की बात करते हैं, आप बोलते हैं ये subsistence based economies हैं. But ये life sustenance based economies हैं और इनसे we can gather lessons of sustainability.
And life world is like something, an important word in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, cardinal.
Yeah. So now, because of the paucity of the time,
Yeah.
Another important question that I wanted to ask is that while again going through a thesis, I came across another important book by Niladri Bhattacharya,
Yes.
Agrarian Conquest and Settlers.
That was a foundational piece. Yeah.
So I think that book is so crucial in making this distinction between nomadic and
Absolutely
pastoralist and agricultural way of life.
Yes.
And the whole transformation that has happened.
That's right.
So very quickly, can you sort of elaborate how come this book is your foundational text?
Definitely. So back in year 2008, Professor Bhattacharya was launching his book here at JNU itself. And then I went for it. And then a whole new horizon opened up, which is where my title also derives from his work. It says the agrarian transformation of rural, because होता यही है कि हम rural को largely agrarian से define करने लग गए हैं. And फिर उसमें pastoralist, and that is one of the limitations that I'd like to discuss about my study, क्योंकि because ये इतना mobile food system रहा है, pastoralist is one aspect of it. There are so many numerous other communities like the Odes, the Banjaras, the other nomadic communities, the Bauris, who were known as classified as the criminal tribes by the British administrators. So there are so many more communities that were interlinked in a beautiful manner together that sustained this food system, which was precarious because of the vagaries of nature. But then they managed to work it. अगर simply बोलें तो उनको शायद मैं उनको include नहीं कर पाई हूँ, because of course it's a thesis, there's a limitation, but that's something I'd like to do, because again we're talking about interdependences and interactions. अगर आप सिर्फ अगेन वही बाइनरी ड्रॉ कर देंगे pastoralist की और agriculturist की, वो भी I think reductionist होगा.
Very quickly, if you can very quickly explain a bit about this transformation having an impact on health, for instance, and how, for instance, we know Malwa is a cancer belt and all.
Right.
So, and I found that a very interesting component of your thesis. So very quickly, if you can elaborate.
Yeah, so the cancer, of course, it's spreading towards this area also. It's very alarming to note कि एक village है, particularly in Sri Ganganagar, it's called Dhalewala, and वहाँ पे around 26 deaths हो चुकी है within the past 2-3 years because of cancer. So it is transcending towards this region as well, not as intensively.
So this transformation had huge consequences on health and
of course
overall life.
Yeah, और अगर आप statistics उठा के देखेंगे तो Ganganagar region में most women are diabetic. They have reproductive disorders, and which was empirically identified during this ethnographic research also. So that is one part of it. But very quickly अगर मैं आपको जैसे एक एग्जाम्पल के द्वारा समझाऊं, तो एक गाडुलिया लोहार जो है कम्युनिटी थी जो कि बर्तन बनाती है लोहे के महाराणा प्रताप के टाइम से, एंड इनका बिलीफ नहीं कहेंगे, अगेन एक लॉजिक कहेंगे, इनका लॉजिक है दैट दे हैव टू कीप मूविंग, दे नेवर सेटल. और क्योंकि पहले औजार बनाते थे, फिर एग्रीकल्चर आया तो एग्रीकल्चरल इक्विपमेंट्स बनाने लगे, और अब ग्रीन रेवोल्यूशन आ गया, टेक्नोलॉजीज इतनी आ गई, तो ये बहुत ही ज्यादा मार्जिनलाइज हो गए हैं. बट द काइंड ऑफ यूटेंसिल्स दैट दे मेक, दे वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर द कुकिंग ऑफ योर फूड. अर्दन पॉट्स फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर आप बात करें इन चीजों की, तो ये जो सारी कम्युनिटीज हैं, और जो ओड हैं, ओड क्या करते थे, दे यूज्ड टू डिग आउट, दे वर नोन एज एक्सपर्ट्स फॉर डिगिंग आउट द टोबाज और द जोहर्ड्स in the land जहाँ जो water sources होते थे, and they were experts in making mud houses. And mud houses, of course, we know, we are hearing कि कैसे अब, back in the UK, I heard some billionaire, he has a house with a thatched roof. And Odes were experts in doing this. And this also has impacts on health. So all of these communities together had figured a way out, a knowledge system, जिनका सामंजस्य साथ में बड़ा important था.
I think this is such an interesting work, and we would like to engage more with your work.
Thank you so much.
Because of the paucity of the time.
Yeah.
And what I've personally liked about your work is like you have explored so many things in the work, and especially incorporation of science and technology studies, which is close to my heart, I would say, as well as historical ethnographic processes. So I think it's a great work, and we thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Vimarsh Cafe. Thanks.
Thank you, Varun.
So with this, we will be ending our episode, and we would like to thank you, and please subscribe our channel and stay tuned for another episode of Vimarsh Cafe very soon. Thank you.